My name is Laura, and it's a pleasure to meet you all. This is open sourcing weaponizable code for the greater good. There are a couple of things, little admin things before we begin. So firstly, I really like discussion. I think discussion is really healthy, and that's how we as a community grow and get better and stronger. So I genuinely do want you to come and join the discussion, and there's a couple of hashtags there. But please remember that it is discussion, and remember it's the internet, which means that that comes with the usual caveats. So please come and say hi online if you don't get a chance to come and say hi in person here. The other thing is an apology. Now, normally I have to give a brief that says don't do crime. I'm not going to do that this time, but I am going to say sorry in advance. This talk and this subject can make people feel slightly uncomfortable. This is intentionally discussing some issues that for many people we intentionally and quite happily just sidestep. So I apologize. My aim is not to make you feel uncomfortable, but I really believe this discussion is important. So let's do a couple of shows of hands. Who believes that we should open source all software? Yeah? Okay, a few, right. How many of you have ever written a tool that you could be used in more ways than you originally intended? Yeah? Okay, good. I'm just trying to get a feel for the room and the kinds of questions you've already asked yourself about your software. How many of you have ever worried about who's using your tool and for what? Only a couple, right? This is a concern I have every single day of the year. I'm going to come into why I'm concerned about that. But we're going to start, as all good places start, with a little bit of background story about me and how I ended up in this mess to begin with. So you will notice that if you look around the security community, we're encouraged to do research. Security is a very fast-moving area. Imagine every technology you use day to day, and then imagine that you had to learn all the technologies for all of you over the course of the year. We kind of jump around the community trying to help people be more secure, but in the process we have to learn every technology on the planet. And not only is it exhausting, but it's impossible. So to help with this, we do research, and it helps bring us outside of our core areas and helps us to do a bit more. Now, I choose to research human-centric security. So the risk associated with just generally being a human in the internet today and how that works. Now, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not even a particularly good developer, but I think it's really important to do this research. So when somebody said to me, oh, you should totally research this area, and I'll talk about the tool that I researched in a minute. And they said, present it. This is what I thought was going to happen. Me stood on stage, kind of wearing my homemade outfit, going, yeah. And then I blissed out a bit, and I said, oh, what's the worst that could happen? People will just ignore the tool. It will go into the ether, and nobody will ever look at it again. That was my hope. I hoped open sourcing, it was actually a bit of a misnomer that nobody ever did that community stuff. So I wrote a tool. Any of you who've ever done Django, I apologize to you. I've misused your framework liberally. And I wrote a lot of stuff with integrating with other systems, and I built a thing. And it did the job. It may not have been glamorous, but it did the job. And I presented it. I presented it at a New Zealand hacking conference called KiwiCon, about 1,200 people in a giant theatre. And it was wonderful. Kind of. Because not everyone was entirely happy. To the point where the privacy commissioner for a large nation came up to me afterwards and suggested that I should probably go to prison. And at that point, I started having a few existential crises about what I'd chosen to do with my life. Because I'm actually fundamentally a quite nice person. I like people. People are pretty awesome. I am one of them. I made a little one of them. You know, I'm actually investing in us creating more of these things. So, I believe that what I'm doing is, in its own special security-focused way, for the greater good. But in the course of this presentation, I want us to have a look at the crises that I am facing, the questions I'm trying to answer. And maybe you can actually think about them in the context of the tools you write. And software in the open source community that perhaps is a little bit different from, happy foundations that build awesome code that will save the planet. So let's get going. In this talk, we will do three things, and we will do them in the minimum amount of pain to you, hopefully. We will tell a story. We'll introduce Ava, the tool, and we'll introduce a few other tools that are in this space. we're going to look at the challenges and the questions we have to answer, and then we are going to wrap it all together and talk about, is there a solution, and what solutions are there to this? People like me, we really, really believe security tools need the scrutiny and love that the open source community can give us. They hold us to account. They keep us honest, or at least there's the opportunity to. So we want to make sure that we're not about to destroy a beautiful community and way of operating by using it for the wrong thing. So the story, let's talk about Ava. Now, I apologize, the branding in this little section is very blue. We're a very blue kind of organization in places. This isn't about the tool. I'm not trying to convert you to doing this for a living, but I want you to understand the tool because you need to understand what it does to understand why this conversation matters, because you will start to get the feeling that why people were unhappy with me. So Ava is a 3-phase vulnerability scanner against humans. So vulnerability scanners have been around for a very long time. They're an automated way of testing for vulnerabilities in software. So you do them in functional testing, just in automated test suites, but in security we have special vulnerability scanners that you can run regularly and find out if you've got any of these common vulnerabilities. Now, people are tricky. Nobody actually really does much in the way of consistent large population vulnerability scanning because we have empathy. And empathy is quite important. And when you start intentionally attacking large groups of people in the nicest possible way, people get a little bit uncomfortable. So it's 3-phase. Let's go through the 3 phases. We have no. So we don't actually understand as people the organizations we've built. We build, once upon a time, the word would have been an organogram. I haven't found the modern word for that. But an organization chart. A chart that, politely says, here's our hierarchy and here's how our business works. Now, if any of you have actually worked in a business, you'll know that that little document there was fiction the second the ink dried on the paper. It is not represented in any system we have on a technological basis. It just doesn't exist. So no is all about actually mapping the connections between the people in an organization or in a group so that you can understand who is actually connected to who reports to who are the more interesting people in an area. And it turns out that human security risk is amplified when we connect to each other. So if you are just talking about a person on their own and the access they have, that's interesting, or the information they have access to. But if you see them as a conduit, a trusted conduit into a network of people, that's even more interesting. Because if you can compromise a person, sorry, I'm going to use really awful terminology all the way through this. If you can compromise a person, they're not just about themselves. They're about all of the accesses they gain through all of their friends and their colleagues and all the systems they connect to every day. Inside Ava, in this No section, we pull information from all sorts of places. So Active Directory and Google Apps for Business, we pull organizational details like groups and structures. But we also pull it from social networks, anywhere that it kind of sits lying around in public. Now, the important part is in public. We do not compromise anything. We are not looking at your secret things. I don't want to know who you're DMing on Twitter. I really don't care. This is things that are already out in the world. And that's a big debate about how much is out in the world, and that's not my problem. It's there now. So we take people, we take identifiers, we take group memberships, relationships, and metadata. So metadata in Active Directory, for example, would be things like their last login time, when their password expires, how many times has they logged in. Those kind of items around the behavior of the account. Once we've got all that information, we've kind of visually graphed it out so we can see all of these people. We test it. And test is like any other kind of testing framework. We are trying to inject threat or risk or attacks into a network of people and measure for behavioral response. So, for the record, there's no malware. We are not actually attacking people. We are sending them links that go to a page that say, you probably shouldn't have clicked that link, but would you like to learn why not? We are putting USB sticks with pictures of cats on them in car parks that phone home. This is not about actual compromise, it's about behavior. Because if they plug in a USB stick with a cat on it, then they would have plugged in a USB stick with anything on it. And when I say they, please be aware, I mean myself and everyone I've ever encountered in my life. We are all as equally susceptible to these kind of attacks. So we use tests that kind of try and mean something. So the types of communication methods that we actually use day to day. So this is quite a mature space in the email world. So there's phishing sites and phishing services and fish for hire kind of things. And every consultancy on the planet now does social engineering testing if you pay them enough money. But they shy away from some of the trickier ones. So social networks, from doing this over populations over time. So we're trying to do the testing to mean something in relation to how people talk now, how they communicate. And we're trying to do it in more interesting ways. If you get an email that says, you've won the lottery, congratulations, for $5 you can claim your money, most of us would kind of turn around and go, delete, or just send it to a friend and go, lol, delete, or post it on Twitter and then go, lol, delete. But it's never really going to end particularly well, except for a very small minority of the population who really want to hope that that's true. We actually have started extending outside of just traditional phishing. Now imagine your frontline help desk, and your job is to field calls from people every single day of your existence. Now, what if your boss or a senior in your large organization got in touch with you and said, I need your password right now, this is an emergency, I am super senior, you will obey. Now, that's a very different type of social engineering attack. That's a very different motivator entirely. And that's not preying on lack of knowledge or naivety, that's actually preying on power structures. So we're trying to extend it outside of the traditional phishing and into things that are actually a little bit squishy, a little bit difficult to deal with, but actually real big problems in organizations. Because imagine you've got 5,000 people or more than that in your organization. Frontline help desk very rarely know who is above them. Perhaps up to a certain grade, they're quite familiar. But when it gets to the seniors, the people who are deciding whether they stay or they leave with a nice pink slip the next day, these are ghosts. These are people they read the names of and have never met. We are sourcing our attacks from people like you. It turns out when you ask the internet, have you ever collected social engineering attacks? Loads of people put their hand up and go, yeah, actually I do. Do you want them? So major banks, universities, all had stashes of these things just sat around. They didn't know why they wanted them, but they had them. So we're turning this into a corpus of known successful social engineering attacks that we can then use for certain things like statistical analysis of them or reusing them and re-engineering them so we can actually generate new text based on likely successful vectors. And we want to open source this too. We are really pushing the boundaries here between what people do in their business lives, what they do in their personal lives. We are talking about people, not work people or home people, not moms and dads, brothers, sisters, cousins. We're not talking about you when you look after a football team at home. We are talking about you in every essence of you, and that's scary. That is really terrifying. That's crossing boundaries we don't cross with security testing. We schedule them, we do them on a recurring basis. The standard kinds of things you'd see in a vulnerability scanner. But the important bit is we're trying to give the option of succeeding. We don't want this to be about going, oh dear, let's all laugh at Bob. Bob got it wrong today. And Mary's got it wrong twice this month, silly Mary. We don't want to do that. We want to actually gamify this so people are incentivized to get it right. And then it becomes a positive thing when you get it right rather than a negative thing when you get it wrong. And then we analyze it all, because you can tell wonderful things by analyzing data, as you all know. We look at behavior over time. Can you chart out somebody's stress level by their reaction to threat? If you've got someone who's been working lots and lots and lots of overtime, and suddenly their behavior and this kind of stuff goes down the pan, something has changed. So we want to know, can we link what has changed in behavior to what's been happening in the organization or in their environment over time? It's written in lots of interesting technologies. I won't go into their names on a board. This list changes from time to time as we're learning which technologies are most suitable. But as you can see, we favor open source things. We are writing open source software from open source, nice, common components. And like I said, we integrate at the moment with Exchange and Active Directory and Google Apps for Business. And we're hoping to extend that out in a nice modular way so we can pull data from anywhere that exists. Now, if that hasn't freaked you out quite yet, awesome, let's carry on. So, we're not the first people to play this game, just for the record. I'm not sure how much awareness there is outside of the security community of what we do for a living, but it turns out the press particularly get a bit confused. Now, there was this little gentleman, he made the news in some places, I'm not sure you'd have heard of him, called Snowden. And so the New York Times, which is this cute idea of like newspapers, if you heard of those, right? So they wrote that he was using this awesome hacking tool called wget to harvest his documents. Wonderful. Okay, so just for the record, before we get existential, yes, any application we write can become a weapon in the right hands. We are not going to debate that. That is. If you give a burglar a brick, they will break into a house the same way they would with a pair of lockpicks. It doesn't matter. They wanted to get to their objective, they've applied a tool. However, there are real hacking tools in the open source community. Now, this is just 4 that I named off the top of my head. And having checked the licenses again this morning, they're released under BSD 3 clause or GPL. These tools, so I'll go through them one after another, are already there. They didn't really have this existential crisis, or if they did, they didn't do it publicly. So Social Engineering Toolkit lets you create PDF files and a range of social engineering attacks, including actual exploits and malware for social engineering pen testers. Metasploit is a system for actually attacking computer systems. So every time there's a vulnerability, people try and write script so that you can automatically attack that. It's used by good people and bad people. Mainly it was designed for good people. And SQL Map is the mother of all SQL injection tools. If you want to try any tool out of this talk that's not Ava, SQL Map's a lot of fun, but please use it responsibly. It's really good at DDoSing servers. So it turns out the more you dig into this part of open source, the unhappier people started getting. And when I started talking to people like lawyers and open source people about open sourcing tools that were actually intentionally doing bad things, people got a little bit upset. And there's a reason for this. Let's talk about those challenges. So I split it into kind of 2 sections. We have the challenges that are around the code base itself and actually keeping it pure to its mission, and then the challenges of usage. So we'll start with that first set. How many of you run open source projects? Yeah. How many of you have ever dealt with the leader of an open source project? Yeah? So running an open source project, at least in my very limited, short experience so far, is really challenging. Because if people are interested and passionate about what you do and want to get involved, they have ideas. And very rapidly, those ideas get turned into code, and that code goes into a pull request. And you're given 20,000 lines of idea. And you, as a community leader, you have to decide, do I understand what this idea was? Do I agree with this? Should it go into the project? Can I say no? What happens when I say no? Leading a project where the code itself is actually risky like this is really hard, because we can't say yes to everything, but you have to be very, very careful with no, because no destroys communities when you use it liberally and without reason. The other thing is, I have a very clear idea in my head of what I want to achieve, of the direction I want to go to. However, my direction and everyone else's direction doesn't really match. The values of the project that you work with are really super important. Now, at Ava, we inherit our values from SafeStack, which is my company, and they are published on our website. It's about helping education, it's all focused on improving security in practical ways and doing it in ways that don't involve fear or the use of the word cyber in any point. So having strong values helps us, but we have strong values as an organization, but we're small, we're only 8 people. What about all these people who come and join us on the internet? What are their values? How do we know if they share our values? How do we know that they've just, how do we know they're together with us? I like to say everyone has a moral compass. We just all point in different directions. And in the security community particularly, that's true. They are some of the most rule-abiding people you will ever meet. You just may not understand the rule set. How do you vet your contributors? Should you vet contributors? This is really controversial in open source. How do you judge whether someone is actually going to be in the best interests of the project? Can you take into account their location and who they work for? If somebody from some shady organization in some remote part of the world comes along and you know that organization does slightly questionable things, are they okay to come and play? Can we judge an individual by their circumstance? This is awful stuff. This is not stuff that makes me happy. This is not decisions I want to make, but it's important. Because if you don't consciously talk about this, then the risk is even greater. How many of you do peer review of code? Are you familiar with the paradox that if you're given 50 lines of code to review, you'll find 10 problems with it, and the minute you're given 1,000 lines, you'll say it's fine? Yeah? Now, imagine the pressure of doing that peer review when you know the outcome is possibly going to do harm to actual people. Not transiently through a computer system where, they might be inconvenienced, but actually is going to directly interface with a person in an intentionally pseudo-malicious way. That's kind of scary. So, are we the best people to peer review this code? How do we get the right people across this code to know whether it's doing the right thing in an appropriate way? How do we enumerate the possible ways this could go wrong? Because this could go wrong. This could go spectacularly wrong. And nobody's going to just do a lolcats picture and go, ha ha. They're going to probably be quite upset. And that comes onto usage. So we've built a tool. We're semi-happy with what it is. And then someone's going to use it. And now this is where my nightmares start. So Ava is released under GPL, version 2. It seemed the most appropriate for what we were trying to achieve. However, choosing licenses is really, really hard. Really hard. So we tried very hard to make sure that this was the best license for us. We did research into, are there licenses that say, you'll do no harm, be good to the planet, be a nice citizen. And it turns out that's an entire rabbit hole of itself, because that's not really appropriate in licensing. We can't really talk about how people should use our software. That's not, other than from the commercial standpoints and passing on the same openness that we hope to maintain in our communities. Plus, I had a slight realization. I'll come to in a second. So, what's the interesting thing about weaponized code and forking? It's kind of like Gremlins. I started out with a very, very fluffy, well-intentioned, adorable little monster. And then someone forked it. And the next minute, there are lots of forks. And all of them don't look so cute and fluffy as this one. And I have absolutely no control over them. They've gone mad and destroyed a city. Forking is a massive issue. Open source is one of the beauties of open source, right? It's, you can pull some code, tailor it to your purpose, maybe push it back, but if you're doing something particularly niche, then maybe it's most appropriate to fork it. But can I sit back and watch while something I know that can do harm is forked? And I can't stop that. That's part of the process here. And then I started thinking about the things I can't control. Because, like I said about moral compasses, there are types of people, it doesn't matter what privacy policy I stick on this, or what license I've released it under, it doesn't matter at all. Because they don't listen, and they don't look at licenses. I had a lovely chat with the privacy commissioner, and he said, because we've got a very plain English privacy policy for Ava, and it's intentionally very plain. And he said, oh, well, that's awesome, it's really well written, but how are you going to make sure that everyone follows it? I was like, well, I can't. He's like, well, this is going to be problematic. I was like, well, the people who do this, they actually want to hurt people. They don't want to hurt people in the way your software says it's okay. Same way people steal things. If you're motivated, you're going to be motivated. But how do we spot these people in our community? Well, you can't. A few of you look quite shady to me. I think, you could be that person, particularly red t-shirt guy, just saying. And then came ethics. So the first lot of technical challenges in terms of control, right? Is there something I could do here to build a wall or to block something while it's open source, while it's out in the world? Ethics and the law are another beast altogether. The law in the security space, to say that it was immature would be the oversimplification of this century. I'm not sure if any of you have been following the debate with, I will now pronounce badly, the WASCON stuff. Any of you, please raise your hand if you heard of this. Right. This is legal controls on the development of exploits in research. So a lot of security researchers like me find vulnerabilities in software, they turn them into exploits and things, and they share them with the companies to try to get things fixed and other use cases. There is now legislation going in that will treat these kind of exploits in a different way, which will prevent people sharing this information. Now, this is an entire mess of a subject, and this is just one part of it. In pretty much every country I've ever lived, I've lived in a few, what I do with computers for my legitimate legal paid purpose is illegal, depending on how you read the 7 lines of law they've given up to it. Law is horrible here. I know that my tool is illegal in Germany. Lots of tools are illegal in Germany, but mine particularly. So there was going to be a nice section on where the law stands on this. And this is the most accurate thing I could find. Because every lawyer I'd spoken to, any lawyers in the room, oh, shame. I'm still hunting for one. If you find a tame lawyer that knows this stuff, please send them my way. They can't help me.
I got one.
You've got a good one. Awesome, fabulous. See, OSCON's awesome for connections. Privacy is our next concern. This we can do a little bit more about. Privacy guidance, while it is different in each country, it has the same shared principles for the most part. The idea is that you should know what somebody is storing about you. You should have the ability to update it if it is incorrect, and in many circumstances to remove it entirely. And you should always have access to asking someone about this. You should always have a channel for asking questions. And for instances of AVA that we control and look after, that's not a problem. So we're building the software so that people are informed the minute their identifiers reach our system, they are emailed. And we say, oh, hi, you now have a profile here. Your boss is doing it in your organization. Please come and have a look. I want you to come and have a play. That's what we're trying to encourage people to do. We want them to own this. We want them to see their scores and see when they were tested and feel a sense of ownership of it. So for us, when we control it ourselves, we can do this. If people are unhappy or want to update themselves or delete themselves, we can give them a channel for that. That doesn't work, however, when we give this to someone else to look after, because they don't share our values. They may not even understand their obligations. And we have a very fine line with how much we can articulate and restrict in the software and how much that actually makes any sense, because it's open source software. What's the first thing you're going to do? Stop commenting out the check lines. We can't restrict it in a way that's enforceable. And the biggest ethical question of all is, could I live with myself if I release something into the world that hurt people? Because my big objective with my research is to make people better and stronger in a space that is, without us understanding it to begin with, incredibly hostile. It has beautiful things in it and wonderful ways to connect to people and share, and to bring things that are much needed to parts of the world that don't have it, like education and healthcare. But it is also full of bad things, and we will have seen parts of that this week alone in the internet surrounding this conference. There is a lot of poison and risk and threat out there. And from a personal perspective, it's very difficult for me to stand with an honest voice and say, I'm completely happy with putting this software out in the open source space. But this directly conflicts with my other opposing side that says, but having it in the open source community means that you're not trying to sell magic, that you're not beyond scrutiny, that somebody in this room or any other room that I ever speak to could raise their hand and go, you're wrong, and they could show me why. And that's what I love about open source, and it's why it terrifies me doing what I do in this space. So what are the solutions to it? Well, I'm not sure there are nice solutions. Step one is the obvious: swing an axe, kill it. Make it closed source, make it magic in a box. It's working for vendors around the planet right now, while we all, wave the open source flag here. Maybe we do have to close source some things. What if the risk of us not being able to control it is so great that we have to hide behind this mirror of secrecy, or veil of secrecy even? But we all know that doesn't really make much difference in the long term. Just because something has its source code hidden doesn't stop people reverse engineering it. or using the same idea that you're promoting and talking about and just writing their own? Is there something to be gained by us keeping it open and saying, well, at least we've done it in a way we think is ethical, and therefore, we're guiding them towards an ethical way of doing it? Closed source appeals to the risk avoidance in me. It appeals to the person who just wants to go, just don't look at me right now, this is scary. Or, I don't want to hurt you. But I don't think it's a very good option. We can stay open source and be super vigilant. But the trouble with that is, we have a few contributors around the world, and we're really grateful for that. But we all have lives and children and hobbies and businesses and jobs, and vigilance is difficult to maintain long term. Vigilance, saying, oh, it's all right, I will just be mindful, means that you are committing to taking some personal step to this process and saying, I own this. This will be my fault. That kind of vigilance is really hard to maintain. Really, really hard. And you need to share it amongst a group of people, preferably, so that you're kept honest. So it's not just one voice that's deciding what is okay and what's not. But how do you find those people? I'm pretty bad at networking anyway, but I'm pretty sure I couldn't just write on the jobs wanted ethical hackers to maintain weaponized human vulnerability scanner. Probably not going to find the right people. The option we're currently exploring, and I'm not entirely happy with either, is a hybrid model. So the core of Ava is open source, all of the code is there, but we're starting to realize some elements, like some types of test data, are challenging for us to open source. So our test data is derived from real organizations, because that's the only way you can really understand where this data looks like and how make it representative. But as anyone in this room will know if they've read about data anonymization is pretty much the devil's work. And I know that our anonymization isn't good enough for that yet, so we can't open source it. So we have 2 repos. I don't want to get to the point where we are making every coding decision based on whether we can open source or not, that we end up with this split landscape that we're trying to integrate, where we've got coupling problems for our people who are contributing and trying to use this tool across a dark boundary that nobody can see into. That kind of thing makes projects unmaintainable. It makes it hard to engage with them. It makes it so that you don't understand all that's there, and that magic comes back. That thing that a vendor will tell you is inside the box is inside the box. You have no reason to doubt it, but no reason to trust. The path forward in this stuff is really uncertain. I brought this talk to OSCON because I wanted to talk to the people who knew this community best. Security researchers are very good at talking to security researchers. It's what we do. And we say big words and we feel really good on stage, and I'll do that in Black Hat in a few weeks, it'll be awesome. But it's not really important. What's important is proceeding with security research to achieve its objectives of doing no harm but making things better. And to do that, we need to learn from communities like OSCON, the open source community, about whether what we're doing is even appropriate here and how we can even begin to control this. Because I believe that open source and security can play nicely together, but I am terrified of the journey to get there. So a few of you said at the beginning that all code should be open sourced. Of those who raised your hand, have any of you changed your mind? No? That's good. Any of you who said that you were kind of on the fence or didn't say anything because it was early in the thing, raise your hand if you think all code should be open sourced. Oh, okay, only 2 now. Raise your hand if you think weaponizable code, blatantly, obviously, written on the packet, weaponizable code should be open source. Yeah. How many of you would like to debate it further? Because that's what I encourage you to do. So here's all the information about Ava. We're up on GitHub. I did promise you earlier the worst Django code you've ever seen. So, I hope I fulfill my expectation management there. We're on the Twitters, and we have a little website with a little brochure. Oh, sorry for the people taking photos. I will be on the Twitters. I don't engage in battles on Twitter, though. So if you find yourself wanting a real debate and tell me anything like I should go to prison, please come and do it to my face. I love those conversations. So those are our hashtags. Does anyone have any questions? Oh dear, stunned silence.
Question?
Yeah.
So you said that at the moment you have a split
Yeah.
repository where part of it's closed and part of it's open.
Yeah.
Is that split on code and metadata or code and tests?
At the moment, the only stuff that's closed source is test data, so mainly JSON files that are used to actually, in the no section particularly, testing the visualization and stuff is very challenging if you don't have big organizations to test on, because we want to try and get the bugs out that way. So at the moment, it's just test data, but I can see definitely along the track as we move more aggressively into the testing space and we broaden that out, there's going to be questions around testing in social networks and things where we have to debate whether those are appropriate to be open or not. And we're trying to do it case by case at this point. Hi.
Can you give some more examples about what the code actually does?
Yeah, so the question was, can I give some examples about what the code actually does? So in No, it pulls metadata from LDAP and from Google Apps for Business. In Test, at the moment, at this point in time, so there's email testing right now, so the standard phishing thing. There's an ability to build a corpus, and we have the initial stages of an email corpus available based on a big university. Interim code is in branches for the Twitter testing, but any Twitter people in the room? Hi. I've been trying to have contacts with your teams because when we start interacting with tools like Twitter in intentionally malicious ways, we're doing exactly the same as people like scammers do. And so we want to make sure we work with their safety and security teams to understand how we do this. I will say for the record, I'm not seeking permission there. What I'm doing is trying to do this as safely as possible. Hi.
Yeah, so how is it that you're, and I'm not being critical.
No, you go for it.
How is it that you're not violating terms and conditions? Not that anybody would.
The question was, how am I not violating terms and conditions? Yeah. Aha. So next question. I've not gone to prison yet. I probably will now. I'm all over the internet. But there's a bigger debate about whether terms and conditions are appropriate anyway. Hi.
This is already open source.
Yes.
If you get uncomfortable with it, what can you do about that?
The question was, it's already open source. That ship has sailed. What can we do about it now? Absolutely nothing. Is the general answer. We have a couple of things in our favor. The first, that it was research-based code, and that it's not complete. So at the moment, the difficulty level in setting it up would prevent anyone who was just, for a laugh, thought, oh, yeah, I've got 5 minutes spare, I'll just go and make a weapon. So at this point, what we have is usable, and someone who is good at it. We're not a very mature open source project, so we're not really accessible yet. So even if we close the doors today, there's still going to be immature versions of this out there. But I think before we become mature and before it becomes so easy to set up that it's, Docker compose up and you've got an entire weapon. I don't think Docker ever imagined that use case, by the way. Then right now it's a good time for us to debate. We didn't really anticipate this conversation happening, so now we're kind of owning it while we realize. Hi.
So I just think of the idea of a weapon, and I mean there are countless examples in the past of weapons and designs and that kind of thing. And just one example is the plans for 3D printed guns.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean you must follow those arguments and look for how that's going about as well.
Yeah. So the question was around other equivalent things. So 3D printing guns, all of that kind of thing. And yes, we follow it. I still think the debate is young there as well, because while it is physically possible, what you're talking about is intention and motivation, and there's a whole range of issues there about why someone would do it. And if they were going to go to that trouble of buying a $2,000 3D printer, why wouldn't they just spend $100 for a shady guy down an alleyway and buy a gun? So we are following it, and we're definitely trying to get engaged in that. But at this point, I don't think it's reached a point where we can learn too much from it other than watching the debate and trying to be mindful. Hi.
Besides developing code and stuff to do all these things, certainly this has been around for years, are there any current efforts to develop the ethics, the models of understanding, things like this, so people can actually get a grip on on the real issues rather than, oh my gosh, it's bad, how can anyone ever do this?
So the question was, has there been any work on actually defining the ethics and how the system of operation works? The honest answer is I don't know. I've not come across anything. But as with all the things in the community, I learn more every time I come here, so somebody will happily point this out to me later. There's definitely a need for it though, but like all of these things, what we do in the community versus what happens in law and in our economic and political environments, they don't always match. So that's going to be a relatively slow and probably painful battle for many people who get involved with it to make sure that it's clear and it actually makes sense in the places we operate. Hi, last one.
All tools that have an intended consequence, in this case you're thinking of the ethics around the intended consequence, have you come across unintended consequences?
So the question was, have I come across any unintended consequences? Was that specifically for this tool or for any tool?
Specifically for this tool.
Okay, specifically for Ava then. In this one, we've seen unintended benefits, which is awesome. We've reduced people's audit time on LDAP servers dramatically, because it turns out all of the rubbish scripts we have all written at some point or other to pull from an LDAP and say who we should be getting rid of and whatnot, turned out if you actually start graphing this visually, so much easier to do. So much easier. But in unintentional bad things, we haven't seen it in action in large organizations, but the one that concerns me the most, the one that is likely to happen, is that visceral gut reaction people have when they're scared. So when they see something has happened that is bad, they go, oh my God, just get rid of it, stop. That kind of knee-jerk reaction that. So if you've ever been in an operations environment where somebody knocks down a server or something accidentally, but they fire that person without doing a root cause analysis and actually figuring out the systematic problems. So my big concern is victimization of people. Other stuff is relatively easy to spot. Somebody uses us to actually attack people on Twitter because it'll make their life easier. Meh. But I'm more interested in what an organization would do with the results. Okay, I will be around. I am nice and friendly, and I don't know anyone here, so please come and say hi. And please carry on the discussion. I really want us to stay in this space, but we need your help to do that. Thank you.